Two armies took the same city. One left it in ruins. The other let everyone walk away. This is a story about which one was which. July the 15th, 1099. The walls of Jerusalem, the same golden sandstone walls that had stood since the time of Suleiman the Magnificent's ancestors, collapsed under the weight of Frankish siege towers. The First Crusade had arrived. 3 years of marching, 3 years of death on the road from Europe, 3 years of a journey that had begun with a speech by Pope Urban II in a field in central France. All of it compressed into a single afternoon as the Crusaders poured through the breach and into the holiest city on earth. What happened inside lasted 2 days. The account of Raymond d'Aguilera, the chaplain who accompanied the southern French contingent, described it plainly. In the temple area, the Temple Mount, where the Dome of the Rock stood, the Crusaders waded through blood that reached to their knees. He recorded this not as horror. He recorded it as praise, evidence of God's judgment upon the enemies of Christ. The Muslim population, soldiers, civilians, men, women, children, was massacred. The Jewish population of Jerusalem was herded into the main synagogue. The Crusaders locked the doors, and they set it on fire. The Eastern Christians, the local Christian population who had been living in Jerusalem under Muslim rule for centuries, attending their churches, practicing their faith without interference, were expelled. The chroniclers who recorded these events did so with celebration. They wrote home. They described the blood as a baptism of holy ground. The chaplain, who counted the dead in the temple area, considered it evidence of divine approval. The massacre was not a failure of discipline. It was doctrine. The Crusader kingdom that was established in the aftermath would last 88 years. For 88 years, Latin Christian kings ruled Jerusalem. The Muslim and Jewish populations that survived lived under their governance, second-class residents in a city whose conquest had been consecrated in their blood. Meanwhile, across the Islamic world, a child was born. In the city of Tikrit, in what is now Iraq, in 1137 or 1138, a Kurdish family produced a son. They named him Yusuf. The world would know him by a different name, Saladin, the one the Franks called Saladin. He grew up inside the Islamic military tradition, a tradition that had its own rules of warfare, its own codes of conduct toward prisoners and conquered populations, its own theological framework for what conquest required of the conqueror. He rose through the ranks of Nur ad-Din's armies in Syria, became vizier of Egypt, unified the feuding Islamic principalities under a single command, and, by the 1180s, had assembled the military force that could challenge the Crusader kingdoms. 88 years after the massacre, he stood outside the same walls, the same gates, the same holy sites, the Dome of the Rock that the Crusaders had converted to a church, the Al-Aqsa Mosque they had turned into a stable. The question was whether the new conqueror would do what the Christians had done, or something else. The 4th of July, 1187, the Horns of Hattin, a volcanic ridge above the Sea of Galilee. On that ridge, in temperatures that exceeded 100 degrees, Saladin's army destroyed the combined military force of the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem. The Christian army, led by King Guy of Lusignan, carrying the true cross, the most sacred relic in Christendom, was surrounded, dehydrated, and defeated. The true cross was captured. King Guy was captured. What Saladin did with his prisoners was recorded by his biographer, Baha ad-Din ibn Shaddad, who was present. He separated them. The ordinary soldiers were ransomed or released. The Templar and Hospitaller Knights, the military orders whose purpose was permanent warfare against Islam, were executed. King Guy was brought to Saladin's tent. The Sultan offered him iced water, a gesture of hospitality that, under Islamic custom, guaranteed the guest's safety. Guy drank. He was spared. Over the next 3 months, the Crusader kingdoms collapsed. City after city fell. Saladin moved through the Levant, not as an invader, but as a political force, offering terms before siege, accepting surrenders, maintaining order. By late September, he stood before Jerusalem. Inside the walls, Balian of Ibelin, one of the last Crusader nobles left, had a garrison of perhaps 1,000 fighting men to defend a city of 60,000. He sent a message to Saladin requesting terms. Saladin's initial response was direct. He reminded Balian of what the Franks had done in 1099. He said he would take the city as they had taken it, by storm, by sword. Saladin agreed to terms, and the terms he offered were, this must be stated precisely because the precision is the point, the documented opposite of what the Crusaders had done 88 years earlier. Every Christian in Jerusalem was given 40 days to pay a ransom. The ransom was modest, 10 dinars per man, 5 per woman, 1 per child. Those who could pay would leave the city freely, with their possessions, escorted by Saladin's soldiers for their protection. Those who could not pay, and there were thousands, became a documented problem. Saladin's brother, Al-Adil, asked for 1,000 of the unredeemed poor as a personal gift, and immediately freed them. Saladin himself freed every elderly person who could not pay. When Balian of Ibelin asked for the release of the remaining poor, Saladin opened the gates and let them go. Unpaid, unransomed, the gates of Jerusalem opened, and thousands of Christian men, women, and children walked out alive. Saladin cleaned the Dome of the Rock with rose water, personally overseeing the restoration of Al-Aqsa. He posted guards at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to prevent any retaliatory damage. The church remained open. Christian pilgrims were explicitly guaranteed access. If this contrast, the same city, two conquerors, two completely different choices, changes how you think about the word enemy, this channel has more. We document the patterns that the Clash of Civilizations narrative needs you not to see. Subscribe. In 1099, the Crusaders' chaplain waded through blood to his knees and called it God's work. In 1187, Saladin's soldiers walked through streets lined with departing Christians and their sheathed swords, and their commander called it justice. His enemies would come for him, an army led by a king who would call him the most worthy prince in the world, while trying to kill him. The Third Crusade arrived in 1189, the military response of Christian Europe to the loss of Jerusalem. It was led by 3 kings: Frederick Barbarossa of Germany, who drowned crossing a river in Anatolia; Philip Augustus of France, who left early due to illness and political calculation; and Richard I of England, the Lionheart, the king whose legend would outshine the rest, and whose documented relationship with Saladin would contradict every assumption about civilizational enmity. Richard and Saladin never met face-to-face. Their war lasted 2 years. It produced some of the most celebrated military engagements of the medieval period: Acre, Arsuf, Jaffa, and it produced something else: a documented relationship of mutual respect between enemies that neither side's institutional narrative could accommodate. The relationship was not simple. At Acre in August 1191, Richard executed approximately 2,700 Muslim prisoners. The stated reason was that Saladin had delayed payment of a negotiated ransom, and Richard feared the prisoners would reinforce the Muslim garrison. The documented reality is that Richard ordered men, women, and children killed on a hillside outside the city. His soldiers carried it out. And then, this is the documented record, not hagiography, Richard sent his personal physician to treat Saladin when intelligence reported the Sultan was ill. Saladin sent Richard fresh fruit and snow from Mount Hermon to cool his fevers. When Richard's horse was killed in battle at Jaffa, Saladin sent him 2 fresh horses, because a king, even an enemy king, should not fight on foot. The institutional narratives on both sides could not accommodate this. The crusading system required Saladin to be the barbarous infidel. The Islamic tradition claimed Richard as the savage Frank. The documented record, letters, gifts, diplomatic exchanges, the testimony of chroniclers embedded with both armies showed something more uncomfortable than either narrative allowed. 2 intelligent, capable, honor-driven men fighting a war whose institutional logic required them to dehumanize each other and refusing to do it. The Third Crusade ended inconclusively. The Treaty of Jaffa, signed in September 1192, gave the Crusaders a coastal strip from Tyre to Jaffa. Jerusalem remained under Muslim control, but Christian pilgrims were guaranteed access. Neither side had won. Neither side had lost completely. Richard went home. He never returned. Richard the Lionheart, the king whose legend is built entirely on the Crusades, spent less than 2 years in the Holy Land and never set foot in Jerusalem. The king who never reached the city became its most famous champion. The Sultan who took the city with mercy became, in Western memory, the villain. Saladin died on the 4th of March, 1193. He was 55 or 56 years old. He had spent the last years of his life in almost continuous military campaign. His biographer recorded that when he died, his personal treasury contained 47 Nasiri dirhams and a single piece of Tyrian gold. He had given everything else away, to soldiers, to scholars, to the poor, to freed prisoners. The man who had conquered Jerusalem and could have claimed its wealth died with almost nothing. Here is what the documented record shows. The Crusaders' own chroniclers describe Saladin with admiration. Dante, not a historical source but a cultural one, placed Saladin in limbo in the Divine Comedy, the highest afterlife available to a non-Christian. The Arthurian romance tradition absorbed Saladin as a figure of chivalry. The enemy became, in the West's own literary tradition, the model of what a knight should be. And yet, the narrative that survived into the modern era, the clash of civilizations, the assumption that Islam and Christianity are locked in permanent, inherent civilizational conflict, requires ignoring this documented record. It requires ignoring the Crusaders' own testimony that their enemy was more honorable than their narrative permitted. It requires ignoring the gates of Jerusalem, opened twice, once in blood by the Crusaders, once in mercy by the Sultan they called their enemy. He died owning almost nothing. He had given most of it away. His enemies called him the most honorable man alive. And they were right, and they kept fighting him anyway. If knowing this matters, subscribe. New stories every week. This is how we got here.